Welcome to the Album Nerds Podcast with your hosts, Andy, Don, and Dude.
Let's go to the movies. Let's go see the stars. It's Album Nerds Podcast. I'm Dude. I got Andy and Don with me. Andy, how you doing on this fine day?
Doing pretty well, buddy. I was thinking you guys can just call me Mr. Pink on this episode. If that works for you.
I don't know about pink. I think maybe Mr. Purple would be better.
Some people prefer purple, but I like pink.
Don, what's up?
I'm good. I'm well. I got my popcorn and I'm ready to go to the movies.
Nice. All right, so this is the Album Nerds Podcast. We love albums in the album format and having a little chat today about some records that have songs that were featured in a movie, and it's just a memorable moment for not only the song, but for the movie as well. So we've got a great show for you today. We're going to go over our listening week, just talk a little bit about the albums we considered. Then we're going to go over our actual album selections. And then we're going to answer a question loosely related to today's topic. And then we're going to spin the wheel of musical destiny to find out what we're going to talk about on the next show. But this week it's all about the movies.
That's what I'm talking about!
Well, sometimes songs are as important to a film as the images. Movies like Forrest Gump and Apocalypse Now featured songs that were not written specifically for those films, but they created memorable and iconic scenes. Today, each of us will present an album which includes a song that was significantly featured in a film.
So yeah, it's an interesting thought because movies and music can sometimes be such a perfect marriage, and you have these iconic scenes that wouldn't be as iconic without the songs behind them. So how'd you guys do? What did you find?
Oh, I found a bunch. I'll throw out a couple there. I'll start back in the 60s. Steppenwolf, Born to Be Wild, Easy Rider, classic. Going forward into the 80s, Peter Gabriel's In Your Eyes from Say Anything off the album So.
Yeah, anytime in any commercial, TV show, movie where there's someone holding, whether it's a boombox or any kind of music apparatus above their head, all you can think about is that scene.
Yeah, classic.
These days, people just hold up a Bluetooth speaker.
Yeah. Or just their phone, yeah.
The one that was most personal to me was from Fight Club. You guys remember the last scene of that movie with the Pixies, Where's My Mind, as all the buildings, the financial institutes explode. Great moments in cinema there. And then one other I'll throw out there too. It was a great album. Iggy Pop's Lust for Life from the late 70s makes an appearance in Trainspotting from the mid-90s. So
that was a moment where that song reignited and got in front of people that hadn't heard it before, me included. We rushed out and bought his record.
Yeah, that's the part of these movies is they kind of bring some of these songs back to life after they've been kind of out of the spotlight for a while. So
yeah, and they mention Iggy Pop a few times in the script. One of my favorite scenes from the 1980s, like teen movie genre was Phoebe Cates in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. You know, she famously walks out of the swimming pool, and the music playing is the Cars Moving in Stereo, which is on their self-titled debut from 1978, which is actually a very good album, and I think I'll get to it at some point. I also thought about Apocalypse Now. You know, The Doors' The End plays a big part in that film. Of course, that's on their self-titled debut, and also the film Donnie Darko is a great soundtrack for somebody with my musical tastes.
Well, that's your nickname, right?
That's funny. But Tears for Fears, Head Over Heels is featured in a cool scene in that one. So, of course, that was from 1985, Songs from the Big Chair.
yeah, that's a great soundtrack.
Donnie Likey.
First of all, I knew what I was going to do almost immediately, so I didn't do a whole lot of exploring, but things that came to mind were Simple Minds, Don't You Forget About Me, but that's not on their proper album. It was added later, but it's from the soundtrack to Breakfast Club, so that was out. The Beatles, Please Please Me, with the song Twist and Shout, because of that scene from Ferris Bueller's Day Off where he's singing it during the parade. That was a big moment when I was a kid.
You could have done Wayne Newton as well.
I'd prefer not to. And Survivor, Eye of the Tiger, the album Eye of the Tiger, just because, Rocky.
Yeah.
But my pick is, I think, better than any of the other options I just mentioned. So why don't we get to it?
You choose me? You ever listen to K. Billy's Super Sounds of the 70s? It's my personal favorite.
Joe Egan and Jerry Rafferty were a duo known as Steelers Wheel.
All right, well, if you couldn't tell already, we are indeed talking about Steelers Wheel and their self-titled debut album from 1972, Steelers Wheel. So Steelers Wheel is a 4-piece rock band from Paisley, Scotland, formed by Joe Egan and Jerry Rafferty. Primary creative forces behind the group. They put out 3 albums in the early to mid-70s, and their big single was Stuck in the Middle with You, which was later used by Quentin Tarantino in his debut film, Reservoir Dogs. Let's play a little bit of that
It's so
now.
hard to keep the smile from my face. Losing control, yeah, I'm all over the place. Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right.
I wish my 3 words were Dylan-esque pop bubblegum.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, everyone thought that was a Bob Dylan song when people became aware of it because of Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, apparently it was an intentional imitation of the style because he was so popular at the time. 3 words I used to describe this album are best in stereo. For me, that song is going to forever be tied to that terrible torture sequence from Reservoir Dogs, which is hard to watch even knowing how it's going to transpire. But it works. It works very well for some reason. Just makes the whole thing very unsettling.
Do we need to describe the scene?
Well, I mean, yeah, just do it briefly. Mr. Blonde, one of the heist crew members. It's a heist movie, Reservoir Dogs, and the cops catch them, and he takes a cop hostage and is torturing him to find out who the rat is in the crew.
But it's so disturbing because he's like kind of dancing to the song. He's going, ooh, and
he's really enjoying it.
And he's pouring gasoline on the guy.
Yes. Yes, that is the disturbing part. I mean, the idea is disturbing, but the fact that Mr. Blonde is taking such pleasure is...
Yes. Anyway, getting back to the record itself, it's a pretty moody collection of psychedelic-infused folk rock, and they try to imitate Dylan's singing style, but the album, I think, sounds a lot more like the Beatles than it does Dylan, in my opinion.
Kind of Klaatu.
Yeah,
yes, here comes
Klaatu than Beatles. Yeah, totally. There's a handful of really great tracks on here, though, that I really came to enjoy. I think we'll get to a couple of them in a moment. But yeah, overall, I was pretty surprised by the quality of the songwriting. You know, it's not an A+ album for me, but I think overall it delivers some pretty interesting moments. Why don't we play the opening cut? This is one of those tracks that I found myself enjoying quite a bit. It's called Late Again.
Stay when everybody's gone away. There's always some.
I really like the harmonies. You know, they're kind of similar to like Simon and Garfunkel. They're so synced up or something that it kind of feels like one voice at times. I think they do a great job on that song and others. Also like kind of the melancholy feel to that song, which opens up the album. The 3 words I chose to describe the album: derivative but well executed. All right, so, you know, as Andy already mentioned, there's Dylan, there's Beatles. I just mentioned Simon and Garfunkel, but it never feels like a complete ripoff, you know. So it's still, I mean, they kind of have their own sound, and it's a pleasant sound. You know, again, I gravitate towards the melancholy, and there's some of that on this record. So, you know, overall, I think it's solid. I can't really identify any weak tracks, although, I mean, I listened to this record a lot this week, and it's hard to identify, you know, other than like the single. I mean, there aren't like a lot of tracks that stuck with me, you know, so like things don't really stand out. But overall, you know, I think the album is good. Not really ambitious, but, you know, definitely a nice listen.
I mean, the final track is one that stuck with me just because the title is odd. You put something better inside me. Mm-hmm. And I know it's about like becoming a better man or whatever. At least that's my interpretation. But just the actual words were hard to like not make dirty jokes in my mind. And that was distracting, right? From maybe in Scotland, that's a totally fine way to say it.
The way it's sung is like totally deadpan serious too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that duet on that song was one of the stronger ones, personally.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But yeah, no, I kind of agree with you, Don. There was just a lot, especially on the B-side. The rest of the B-side was just kind of like solid, good, but not super memorable. Why don't we play one of the songs out the A-side that I do think sticks with you a little bit? It's called I Get By.
Too late to go to work, walk my dog instead. I don't try hard, but I get by.
Yeah, I like that's got a little grit to it, a little more of a classic rock, hard rock sort of sound. I think it's well executed. It's definitely, I think it's the best song on the album. Stuck in the Middle with You is obviously the most memorable, but this one actually I think sounds like this band when they're not necessarily imitating Bob Dylan voice, which makes that song memorable, but also it's a little distracting from who they are. The 3 words I used to describe this album are so ears on.
Gross.
Definitely worth a listen, although severed ears will haunt me forever, as Andy alluded to earlier. But it's one of those things where I didn't even consider them as a band that I would ever listen to. It was just some 70s song that was fun and from Reservoir Dogs. Actually listening to this record, it's worth sewing your ear back on to hear it because it's good stuff. I mean, it's not like, it's not a world-changing type of record, but it's very enjoyable, and it's certainly more than just that single. There are really nice moments, and it's a good listen. And then, of course, you got Jerry Rafferty, who I, again, familiar with him, but had no idea that he was in a band. Although it's mentioned in Reservoir Dogs, but I'd forgotten.
Yeah, me too.
Jerry Rafferty didn't ring any bells at the time.
Rafferty was a candidate for the Yacht Rock show.
Oh yeah, and the saxophone show.
Yep. I have that album, but I didn't make the Steelers Wheel connection.
Yeah, I mean, they both seem like they're pretty solid songwriters, and there's a couple moments on here where they really shine. I really like the track in the middle of the record called Outside Looking In, just kind of like a psychedelic folk rock track, which I think works pretty well. So yeah, definitely some interesting moments. If you haven't heard the full record, it's not too long. Not going to put you out too much. Definitely some interesting little gems from the period, I think. So yeah, Steelers Wheel.
As K Billy's super sounds of the 70s weekend just keeps on trucking.
I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
If you're enjoying the show, and we hope you are, do us a solid and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Maybe we made you laugh, or you discovered an album you enjoy. Leaving a review keeps the show going and helps other music fans find us.
Are you crying? Oh no, baby, please! You are far too fine to look so sad. It breaks my heart to see you this way. You tell Special K what he can do to make you feel better.
All right, so that's a clip from 1998, Can't Hardly Wait, a film by Harry Elfont and Deborah Kaplan, basically a teen movie from that era. So the title Can't Hardly Wait actually comes from a song by the band The Replacements. So my pick is their album Pleased to Meet Me from June 1987. It's the 5th studio album by the rock band formed in Minneapolis in 1979. The core lineup of the band was guitarist and vocalist Paul Westerberg, guitarist Bob Stinson, who actually doesn't appear on this album. He had gotten kicked out or left just before. Bass guitarist Tommy Stinson and drummer Chris Mars. So here's that track, Can't Hardly Wait.
Bryan Adams could have really nailed that song.
He really could. So that song actually plays over the closing credits, so I wouldn't say it's like the most memorable scene from the film, but of course they did take the title from it. That song features guitar actually from Alex Chilton, who was in the Box Tops and Big Star. Of course, there's a song on the album that's a tribute to Alex Chilton. In fact, I think the lyrics to the song kind of are inspired by the Box Top song, the letter. Give me a ticket for an airplane. Great song. Actually includes horns and strings, which is somewhat atypical for the Replacements. They've always been kind of like this raw guitar group. But on this album, they were, branching out more. The 3 words I chose to describe the album are bubbling from underground. So the Replacements never really made it to the mainstream. This is probably the album that got them closest. I mean, it's a really hooky album. Even though it's raw, it's got some polish to it. And I'm not sure why it didn't quite work out for them. I guess they just never really played the game. They were on Saturday Night Live and I guess got completely drunk and basically blew it. It just seems like if you read their biography, just like every time they kind of could have made it, they just sort of sabotage themselves.
So they were truly not ready for primetime players. Yeah.
So well, let's hear another song from this album. Never Mind.
Just as Don has a particular weakness for a particular 80s style, as do I. And this evokes some definite Springsteen vibes, which is, I think, why I like this song so much.
Oh, yeah.
And that's, the raspy voice, the Bryan Adams, the Bruce Springsteen thing. Like, I love that period. And this album has those elements all mixed together with kind of indie rock of the time.
I want to hear Springsteen do that song.
Yeah, I know. You could rip it up. So Nevermind was written by Paul Westerberg. It blends elements of punk and alt rock and a little bit of folk, I guess. And they have kind of a signature style. The 3 words I use to describe this album are alt rock blueprint. This was much better than I expected. I've never really listened to the Replacements, but it covers all the sounds I like in alt rock and even pop rock. But I was only aware of their existence because of Paul Westerberg's contributions to the Singles soundtrack in 1992, like Dyslexic Heart.
Na 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 na.
Yeah. This was an enjoyable album, and it definitely felt like the precursor to what started happening on college rock radio and your 120 minutes and all of that stuff. These were the godfathers to some degree of the poppier side of that, as opposed to like Husker Du and bands like that being on the harder, the sort of almost punk, almost metal kind of side of it. So I did enjoy this record, and it was fun to listen to, and it's a nice collection of songs, and it's got enough moments for me to grapple onto with that raspy voice that carried me through.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite aspects of the Replacements are Paul Westerberg's lyrics. That song that I mentioned, Alex Chilton, he says, "Cerebral rape and pillage in a village of his choice. Invisible man who can sing in a visible voice." I don't know. I mean, cerebral rape and pillage sounds, maybe we wouldn't do that today, but just, kind of clever, imagery there. And then that one song, Valentine, "If you were a pill, I'd take a handful at my will and I'd knock you back with something sweet and strong." Just kind of, sort of rough poetry or something. Well, let's hear more. Here is The Ledge.
I guess that was a single off the record. Made a video for it. Got pulled from MTV just because of the kind of explicit content described in the song and in the video. But that one, that really jumped out to me as being pretty catchy from my first couple of listens. But there were quite a few tracks on here I ended up having a taking to after a few times through the record. 3 words I used to describe this album are post-punk coming of age. Yeah, I mean, kind of as Dude said, there were definitely lots of other bands I heard, like The Clash and Springsteen and ZZ Top even a little bit, listening to this. But it felt like, for me, the record always came back to kind of like that jangly sort of pop sound. I was surprised these guys are from Minnesota, because I heard a lot of like UK sounds kind of bubbling up here.
Well, it's pretty close to Canada, which is the North American UK, so
tangentially related, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, I enjoyed the horns quite a bit. I thought that part worked well. It was surprising to hear in this kind of music, but I think it worked pretty well. Another thing I mentioned that really stood out to me, there's a handful of tracks that are a little bit more stripped down and intimate. Nightclub Jitters and towards the end of the record, Skyway. Really let the vocalist kind of take over on those tracks. I thought those worked really well. I was surprised by how much emotion he got out of his voice after, being kind of gruff and abrasive on some other tracks there. He does have a sensitive side that I think is pretty compelling. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think this record has kind of a sheen to it, as seems to happen in the 80s. I'd be curious to hear their previous 2 records and what if they had a little bit more, rough around the edges. Maybe if that would be a little bit more interesting. It sounds like they're maybe like trying to cross over and become that big hit. Having some more palatable moments on here. Is that accurate, Don?
Yeah, I don't think it was. Well, it's definitely, I guess Paul Westerberg is the one who really wanted to do different things. But I think he was not somebody that really wanted to have hits, So like, I don't think it was intentional to cross over. But I think the other guys in the band just wanted to keep making kind of just straight up, kind of edgy rock. And he, wanted to incorporate elements of jazz and folk and stuff like that. When I think about what happened with alternative rock, when it really exploded in the early 90s, I look to the Replacements and Pixies as being like 2 bands that really, I think, paved the way, for what happened, but kind of got left behind. Okay. So with their 1987 album, Pleased to Meet Me, that was the Replacements.
Yeah, well, you're the one, Amanda. He's going to be embarrassed.
Amanda.
Excuse me. I'd like to ask you a few questions.
Well, it's time for Deep Questions with Don. So, well, that Steelers Wheel song stuck in the middle, I'll never hear it again without imagining that scene from Reservoir Dogs. And there's been a lot of songs over the years where, my associations with it are associated with something in the mass media, and it's often advertising. So, are there any songs that you guys now associate with products?
Unfortunately, yes. Advertising, it's gotten into my brain. There's a couple that just came right to mind as being like, I'm sure I've seen them in a variety of different commercials. Lenny Kravitz, Fly Away.
Oh,
so many airline commercials I've seen associated with that.
Oh, it's such a bland song, and then
but it's got a great message for Delta.
Yeah, for airlines.
And the other one also has been bastardized for me, unfortunately. Tina Turner, Simply the Best. I've seen like that in quite a few variety of different commercials, like grocery stores and whatnot, banks.
Yeah.
Yeah, just unfortunately really broad general messages that seem to resonate with a variety of different products and services. Hopefully they're getting paid well for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few examples. I mean, Revolution by the Beatles being used for Nike ads. And at the time, I thought it made the Beatles cooler because Nike was cool and I was a teenager and dumb. But thanks to Michael Jackson owning the rights to the Beatles catalog and using it for commercials, although apparently there was a lawsuit, Yoko Ono approved it, and the other guys, the remaining members, there was a lawsuit where they were like, this is, there was an out-of-court settlement. So, yeah, so when Don mentioned The Letter by the Box Tops, it reminded me of how that song is ruined, because whenever I think of it, there was a Wheel of Fortune commercial and it was, buy me a ticket for an airplane, I'm going to play the Wheel of Fortune game. So whenever I hear that song, that's all that gets stuck in my head.
That's like another level when they like rewrite the song like for the commercial. Oh, that's so egregious.
Yeah. Yes. How about you, Don?
Well, there's actually 2 songs from the Bachman-Turner Overdrive that have been overdone many times. So Taking Care of Business, I feel like has been in, I don't know if it's car dealerships or whatever. And then the other, You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet. Yeah. I feel like those have both been, in so many ads over the years. One recent one, the song It's Magic, or I think it's just called Magic by the Pilot.
Oh, it's magic.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. Well, they're one of the prescription drugs is Ozempic or something. It's like, Ozempic. That's the worst. Okay. Well, what other songs have been ruined by commercials? Let us know. Hit us on the socials, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Also on Discord, albumnerds.com/Discord.
I think we'll go with a little Bohemian Rhapsody, gentlemen. Good call.
I guess to me, fairly obvious choice here is Queen, A Night at the Opera from November 21st, 1975. Queen, well-known band, many hits, iconic singer. We've got Freddie Mercury, Brian May, John Deacon, and Roger Taylor. The album features Bohemian Rhapsody, which is probably one of their most well-known songs and was in a famous scene in Wayne's World, 1992 hilarious comedy that I saw in the theater at the time and was introduced to this song for real. I mean, I had heard it before, but there was the whole new excitement around it. So why don't we listen to a little bit of Bohemian Rhapsody. So for me, every time I listen to this song, I am waiting for the Wayne's World moment still after all this time.
The headbanging
sequence? So me and my friends saw the movie and right after went and picked up the cassette single of this song that had recently been re-released, had a little sticker on it that said as featured in Wayne's World, and drove around and just listened to it on a loop and did the headbanging thing over and over again.
It is fun.
So A Night at the Opera, as I mentioned, was released in 1975. The album title was inspired by the Marx Brothers film of the same name. Apparently they were watching the movie during the sessions, and it just seemed like a good description of the music they're putting together. The album has a really wide range of musical styles: rock, opera, ballads, vaudeville, tinges of metal guitar in its infancy. Each member of the band contributed to the songwriting and the vocal harmonies, the complexity of the vocal layering and all of that stuff. I mean, they were, for this song in particular, they had to bounce the tracks across 8 generations of 24-track tape, requiring nearly 200 tracks for overdubs.
Wow, that's amazing. 200 tracks and then 75? Wow.
Yeah, today's technology, it would be much easier. It took 3 weeks to complete the song, with some sections featuring 180 separate overdubs.
Wow.
It's just like his vision. I guess this song had started as a vision to him in the late 60s to Freddie Mercury, and it came from an idea for a kind of a country song. It incorporated elements of this song he had called the Cowboy Song, which contained the lyrics, "Mama just killed a man." So I've always, in listening to this, it always felt like a bunch of different songs strung together, and then the operatic parts with the Bas Mila and all that stuff, which were all references to various, some of it to the devil, some of it to other works of literature and things. But to describe this album in 3 words, I went with Regal Rock Symphony. The diversity mirrors an operatic voyage, shifting the moods and genres with a lot of finesse, right? Freddie Mercury's vocals shine. They're emotive, captivating. And this is my first time really digging into this album. I've listened to it before, but I've never really given it a fair shake because it's always been all about Bohemian Rhapsody to me. But I came to enjoy the quirkier moments, and I was just always waiting for the rock parts. I wanted more of the harder rock sounds that some of their other albums contained. But I grew to really love it in my time preparing for the show. So why don't we jump in and listen to one of the rockier tracks? It's the opening track, Death on Two Legs.
With your narrow-minded cronies who are fools of the first division. Death on two legs.
When that song came on, I was kind of blown away by how, I mean, it's metally guitar there at times, for sure. And just so inventive and so creative. Speculated to be the first, or among the first diss tracks. It's about the band's former manager, Norman Sheffield. 3 words I use to describe this album: if you're gonna queen in this, I think this is a great place to jump into the band. They are really operating at full Queen level here, just like so inventive and so diverse and so seemingly random, but obviously these tracks took a lot of effort to compose and record. I think the best moments are when they are doing kind of those sort of zany, surprising things, which happens a lot. Man, if the whole record was like Death on Two Legs, this probably would be like one of my favorite albums of all time, I think. But there's a lot of other moments on here that are not as compelling to me. The ballads, unfortunately, I think kind of lose me on a little bit. But, there's a lot to be said for the other moments that I think work really well. Like those goofy show tune-esque tracks like Lazy on a Sunday Afternoon and Seaside Rendezvous. I found like those would be really fun. And just kind of like Klaatu, sort of, but yeah. I think a better version of that.
Ass sphincter says what?
What?
Excuse me? A bacon powder?
Yeah, and then you have Bohemian Rhapsody to like kind of wrap things up at the end, which is just like such a breath of fresh air. You know, even after all these other zany moments, it still just never gets old. And for me as well, is also always going to be tied to that beginning of Wayne's World too, which is so iconic and great on its own.
Party time! Excellent!
So yeah, it's a pretty great record. Not perfect, but it's a pretty compelling listen. You definitely don't get bored listening to this thing.
All right, so why don't we check out another track? This one is very interesting in terms of its subject matter. A little bit of 39.
So that song really stood out to me for some reason. Well, first of all, the vocals are actually provided by Brian May on that song. He also composed the song. It's got this sort of weird kind of folky, almost feels like a 60s kind of record, but it's like a sci-fi song.
Yeah, it's like sci-fi skiffle. It sounds like skiffle from the English traditional music there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the song's about space explorers who embark on a year-long voyage, but when they return, they realize 100 years have passed because of time. Is it dilation effect? Yeah. Which is that what also happens in Planet of the Apes? Remember him going, everybody you know is dead. Yeah.
God damn you all to hell!
Anyway, so just a really, really interesting song. Deacon plays double bass on that. The three words I chose to describe the album are just a night with Queen. You know, I think this album kind of gives you everything that Queen has to offer. Mm-hmm. It's ambitious, right? It's gaudy, and sometimes I think that's what keeps me away from Queen records is just that, over the top
theatricality stuff.
Yeah. But it's, it has some silly moments, but it's very catchy. It's often beautiful, but it's also just, it rocks as well. There's some like real metal on this album.
Now, Don, you didn't mention Brian May's educational background and why he's interested.
Oh, that's right. He's like a physicist or
yeah.
Yeah. I've heard about that dilation effect before and I still don't get it.
Well, he does. We don't need to.
So speaking of May, I love his guitar sound, and that's, I really like guitarists that you just recognize, when you hear him, you're like, oh, that's Brian May. And I don't know if it's the guitar itself. So, he famously plays the Red Special, which is a guitar that he and his dad built together. So that might be the unique sound there. Also, John Deacon created this amp that he was using that they call the Deaky amp. He likes to play with his Deaky.
Swing.
Yeah. The other thing I found out was that he usually plays with a coin instead of a pick. So he uses he said like a sixpence. I guess that's some English coin. Yeah. He said it gives him more control or something. I've tried playing with like a dime or a penny before.
Yeah, it's more scrapey. On the,
it's just for the metallic like interference.
And now I think I kind of hear it. Anyway, I really enjoyed this album. Like Dude, I hadn't really delved into it before. I had actually never heard Bohemian Rhapsody until it was made famous by Wayne's World. And that was also around the time, it was just after Freddie Mercury had died and they did a concert for him and stuff. So Queen was very much like in the, in the public.
The zeitgeist.
Yes. So yeah, it was an exciting time to get introduced to Queen. And, I like some of those weirder songs like Seaside Rendezvous and the Prophet song. There's some goofy vocal stuff going on. So yeah, just an innovative and interesting album. So Donnie Likey.
Yeah, I'm in love with my car. Also, that one was sung by Taylor, and so it's cool that although Freddie was known for his vocals, they all still got to share kind of a little Beatley in that way.
Yeah,
that I'm in love with my car sounds like the Who.
Yeah,
sounds like
it does.
Daughtry.
It does. Yeah. So I think Bohemian Rhapsody, that song, kind of of encapsulates all the things that all the other songs on this album do. It's kind of like a Cliff's Notes of what this record is.
Yeah, no, it really does. Yeah.
Like I said, I really came to appreciate the details, the attitude, and just the presentation of this band, the way they wanted to present themselves. Record companies be damned.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I am going to nominate this for the Album Nerds Hall of Fame. Now, although I prefer the harder rock side of Queen, the albums I lean towards are like Sheer Heart Attack and the debut album, Self-Titled. But in really getting down and dirty with this record, I think it really, like I said earlier, it says who this band is and explores all the parts of them that they more lightly peppered into their other releases. So I think this sums up who they were as a band and at their creative height. So I think this is a good representation of the greatness of these guys. Thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's not an A+ album for me, but I do think it's probably the Queen record I would go back to most regularly, and I agree it represents like their cornucopia of sounds best. So yeah, I think I'm on the same page with you on this one. I would say yes for the Hall of Fame.
Done.
God Save the Queen. Yes.
All right. I think we would have gotten some negative feedback from listeners if either of you guys had said no. All right, so that was Queen, A Night at the Opera. If you haven't dug into its depths, I implore you to do so. It took a few plays, but I was hooked after.
I like the Diki.
I bet you do.
I like a Diki. Okay, well, there were a lot of options out there, and we all ended up picking movies from the 90s.
Yeah.
But the songs were from all over the place. What did we learn?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. So for me, like I often associate a song or an album with a particular time in my life or an event I was at or maybe a person sometimes. But it also works pretty well for movies. I mean, some of these scenes, like we've talked about, are just like etched together with those songs that are on the soundtrack. So that's just so cool that our brains work in that way. It's just a nice little...
It's a cataloging system that we've
yeah, I guess it is.
employed.
But it's a fun one we can take advantage of. The other thing I'll mention too, I think is great, especially in the case of like Queen here, and I suppose the other bands too. Kind of bringing these bands back into the zeitgeist. Once they've kind of maybe stepped away, or maybe a song didn't land quite as big as it could have at the time it was released. Giving it a second chance, or maybe pulling it back into the spotlight. Is a cool.
Or that first chance, yeah.
Yeah, so I appreciate that too, of the power of movies.
I'll have what he's having, because those were the two potential points I had written down.
Zeitgeist.
I'm the only one that had it written down. Besides those great points, because that combination of memory, movie, and music is pretty cool. But also just the phenomenon of soundtracks, movie soundtracks, sometimes being their own record. And we didn't get into that here, but like separating those two was something that I think was good for me when we were doing this, was kind of splitting those into two different categories. So yeah, good times.
I suspect we're probably all the same, because I think we're probably auditory people, the three of us. But I know, when I watch a film, the music, whether it's the score or the songs, just, are always just a big impactful, part for me. It's what I tend to remember. And I'm not sure that that's true for everybody, but I think a lot of times I'm more likely to remember how a song was used. Yeah, have you guys ever seen the Perks of Being a Wallflower? Like, the only thing I really remember from that film is them listening to David Bowie Heroes as they're like driving through a tunnel. You mentioned Easy Rider, Born to Be Wild. Like, that's what I remember. I just remember them on motorcycles to Born to Be Wild. And so that's what always sticks with me is the songs.
And that's One to Grow.
I'm your density. I mean, your destiny.
All right, boys and girls, it's that time once again. Gather around. We'll see what the Wheel of Musical Destiny has in store for us next week.
Your musical destiny will be taking you back down south. You will be exploring the top 25 country albums from the 2010s as chosen by the Billboard magazine staff. Crack open a few cold ones and get listening.
Billboard's best country albums of the 2010s. So Billboard staff put together a list of 25, and we're each going to pick one. So we might have to get into some unfamiliar or uncomfortable pop country territory, gentlemen.
Oh, wow. Great.
I'm ready.
We don't have any ongoing Album Nerds Hall of Fame voting, but you can submit ideas for the Wheel of Musical Destiny up on our website, albumnerds.com.
Yeah, what's your favorite country album from the 20-teens? What's your favorite song from a movie? Let us know. Join fellow album nerds on Discord at albumnerds.com/Discord. You can email us at podcast@albumnerds.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at Album Nerds. Also, please subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast app. And if you'd like to support the show, you can do so via PayPal at albumnerds.com/support.
Thank you once again for joining us on the Album Nerds podcast. We'll catch you in them there 2010s, y'all.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Catch you next week.
Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Pretty good. We haven't had a chance to do the Bob Dylan voice in a while.